Welcome back to That Rugby Podcast, brought to you by the Sports
G'day.
Booth. You're joined by myself and Husey. An interesting week of rugby, I guess.
Yes.
There was a lot of... It came out during the week, obviously last week, that Eddie Jones was naming this squad for an April training camp. It was going to be less than the squad of what Dave Rennie named when he named 40, and we're going to see 33 players named. And I guess Super Rugby kind of built into the excitement of Sunday afternoon when we saw the squad named.
Yes.
An interesting squad. Obviously, a couple of key names left out. I like what Eddie's done. I love he's come out and said this is their first opportunities for these players specifically to have an opportunity to show me what they've got. But Australian rugby's got a depth of talent that he seems to think he can see. I'll question him on that maybe one day if I ever sit down with him. But, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting squad. What is your first takeaways from it?
It's a good, fresh take on it. I think you get that when you get a new coach in where nobody is safe. Everybody's being examined, and we're really seeing that here. So Tate McDermott is probably a big one being left out of the squad, and Noah Lolosio as well. So you could see that it's not even just based on team performance, it's based on individual performances as well.
Yeah.
And you called it last week, Carter Gordon has been named in the extended squad, which I think we both agreed was a good move. But a new name in the halves as well in Ryan Lonergan, joining his brother Lockie Lonergan in the extended squad. There's a couple of names I'm surprised that have been included, mainly, and I know it's just, we said it's based on current form. Eddie's looking at this without a view at previous Wallabies performances, but Suliasi Vunivalu, I think, is one where he struggled to even make the Wallabies A squad. But I think maybe Eddie just feels like he can get the best out of him. So I'm not opposed to it because Vunivalu's got all the talent in the world. Is the main one I'm looking at and just sort of scratching my head. Darcy Swain's another one where it's a bit like, I don't really know. I feel like he causes more troubles than he solves in the Wallabies jersey.
Yeah, I guess Darcy Swain's one where that's the position of issue for you guys with the locking position. I mean, I think Matt Phillip and Isaac Rodder both out with injury, so couldn't be considered. And then you've got, obviously, Big Scouts and Arnold. Is it Rory Arnold? Yeah, Rory Arnold.
Rory Arnold.
Overseas. So, yeah, I mean, look, Vunivalu's, I think, being picked based off ability and ability alone, and ability we haven't seen fully yet. A very Marika Korobeti. I don't think Marika had the best transition into rugby, but obviously now is one of the best rugby players in the world. So it's a question of, what can Eddie get out of Vunivalu, and it wouldn't surprise me if he gets the best out of him. So you see players like Corey Toole miss out, who's been on fine form for the Brumbies. And you question it a little bit, but again, I think people will back Eddie. It's also really interesting, the players, overseas-based players he's invited to join via Zoom, which he's got Rory Arnold.
No, he doesn't have Rory Arnold. He's got Richie Arnold, his brother.
Is that Richie Arnold?
It's Richie Arnold, his brother. Yeah, so that's another a big thing is that it's sort of been a bit of a challenge to Rory Arnold that it included his brother and not him.
Interesting. And his brother, I'm assuming, a lock as well?
Yes.
Never even heard of him. But I
know he's never played for the Wallabies.
Yeah.
He played a few games for the Western Force and the Brumbies. 32 years old. And is 6'10".
6'10". Jesus Christ! All right, I see why you've got him overseas.
Nearly 2.1 meters tall. Yeah.
Lordy. All right. Well, so Richie Arnold and Skelton, the locking duo. Then you've obviously got
big boy locks. Yeah.
Cooper, Foley as your first fives, and then you've got Korobeti Karevi as there, and then Tom Banks as well. Which is, I don't think that's a surprise, that group. Obviously, no. I thought Richie Arnold was a spelling mistake on the Rugby Australian website. So
that's what I thought as well until I looked further. You know what? It's so funny. It's exactly what I thought. Because just like you, I never heard of Richie Arnold before. But apparently he has been really playing well in France because he plays for Toulouse. And he's been playing really, really well over there.
If anyone's going to know a talent out of France, it'll be Eddie Jones. Yeah. So, obviously, they've got the rehab group, which is Angus Bell, Rob Leota, and Taniela Tupou. And they're not considered due to injury, Flau Whainga Alex Murphy, Hunter Pasami, Matt Phillip, Isaac Rodder, and Tom Linner. So, I mean, all of those players, it'll be interesting where they fit into the mould and how he goes about it. I don't think the three really changes. It's Korobeti, Karevi, and then Cooper or Foley. You just take your pick. I think how big of an issue he sees the locking will decide if a lock comes over a first five, but I can't see him not selecting Korobeti and Karevi.
Yeah, I think those two have to be in there. And then I think he'll probably take a look at how his other 10s are going in, Carter Gordon in particular, about how he's playing, whether or not you take one of the other fly halves from overseas, or if you bring in another lock. I just want to read out this quote because I think it's a really good one from Eddie Jones here about Rory Arnold and Richie Arnold. And I think it's important to say this because it really shows his attitude for coaching. So, because you might not know, Rory Arnold plays for a Japanese team. Now, this is a really interesting story. So the Japanese team he's played for, the Haino Red Dolphins, has withdrawn from the Japanese competition this year because a bunch of their players, not including Rory Arnold, had a massive night out and a bit of a drinking spree and got caught doing it and have caused a bit of a stir over there in Japan. So the club's out of the competition for this year. But Rory Arnold, despite being asked to come by Super Rugby clubs and play Super Rugby in Australia this year, has opted to stay in Japan, where he will make $1.5 million a year, not playing rugby because the club isn't playing rugby this year. So he's there not doing anything. And so Eddie Jones has pissed him off a bit. And Eddie Jones has said, so the club is the Haino Red Dolphins, and Haino make trucks. And Eddie Jones said, I think he's working on the factory line at Haino, isn't he? I think he's making those trucks because he's not playing rugby at the moment. To get selected, you have to be playing rugby. We don't pick players that make Haino trucks.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I saw that whole
shot
story
across the bows.
Yeah, I saw that story come out, and obviously nothing to do with Rory, the incident, but it was interesting his decision to stay in Japan and say he was going to prep for a World Cup if needed. He wasn't selecting himself, but that, I guess you got to draw a line, I guess. But I mean, to be fair, the question would have been, would you have selected him over Skelton? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
$1.5 million, but it does show the attitude that Jones is bringing, I think, where he's not afraid to say that, if you're not committed enough, you're not good enough for the gold jersey, which I think is a good standard to be bringing back in. Some more pride in the Wallabies jersey.
100%. So the big question, I guess, is Noah Lolesio. Left out.
Yes.
What do you make of that? Now, he's been considered the golden boy. Again, it's really interesting, and I'm a little interested as well. Nick White has made the squad. I don't think it's because Nick White's not playing well. It's just the way the Brumbies have gone about it this season, obviously, and this is why I think Ryan Lonergan's made the squad, because he started generally the most amount of games, and they had the same with Jack. I'm going to butcher his last name, DeBrasini, starting against the Waratahs at the start. DeBrasini. So I wonder if that has had any impact. Your thoughts, I guess.
Well, yeah, so we've got Ben Donaldson and Carter Gordon in this extended squad here over Noah Lolesio, right? And I think if you sort of looked at Super Rugby this year, Donaldson's inclusion over Lolesio is probably the biggest head scratch for me, but I guess it's because Donaldson can play 15 if called upon. He's shown that he could play 15 this year.
Well, I think that experiment has well and truly passed by, because the way he played on the weekend at 10 was a level above the way he's been playing at fullback. So I think
exactly, but I think it's just an additional feather in his cap. Yep. It's just something that's maybe just pushed him over the top there. And then in Carter Gordon, we said you've got that bit of a different style of 10 compared to Lolesio. Yeah, I don't know what Eddie's thinking here. I don't mind it because he's full of good quotes, Eddie Jones, and one of the quotes he said about the squad was, for the players that are in the squad, it's their opportunity to show why they should be in the squad and why they should keep their position in the squad. And for those not in the squad, it's their opportunity to show why they should be in this squad and have somebody else taken out. So I think he's challenging Noah now to step up his game even more in the next few weeks, because one of the biggest things Eddie Jones said, and I think this is super important, is that he's seen a lot of good things from the Australian Super Rugby squads. One of the things he hasn't seen, which is so important, is beating New Zealand teams, right? So if we look at the Brumbies this season, beat the Waratahs in week 1, beat the Blues in week 2, and I think that's a big one for Eddie, and that's why we see so many Brumbies players in this one. Week 3, they beat the Reds. Week 4, they beat Moana Pacifica. And week 5, they lost to the Crusaders, but that was with a lot of their players out. And then they played the Waratahs this week, and they got the W. So I think, 1-1 against New Zealand teams this year, arguably, it was one of those victories you could sort of, one of those, the loss you can sort of put to the side because they were resting a bunch of their Wallabies players. But I think that's what Eddie is trying to ignite a fire in Noah, is to get him to up his game against the New Zealand teams. Now, the Brumbies don't play a New Zealand team for 4 weeks until they play the Hurricanes, actually your Hurricanes, on the 28th of April, right? So they've got a while to go before they actually get to play in the New Zealand team. But I think he wants to see him take ownership of the Brumbies in the next couple of weeks. And, they've got a game against the Reds coming up and then the Dura before they have a bye week and then they're facing the Hurricanes. So they don't have the toughest competition coming up until they play the Hurricanes. So I think that's what he wants to see, is he wants to see Noah put his stamp on the Brumbies. Yep. And the fact that they selected 2 halfbacks from the Brumbies ahead of Noah as well, I think will be... Yeah, I think he wants to see him get angry. I think he wants to see him play with some passion.
Yeah, it's a challenge set down, and I think he's hoping to get the best out of him, a bit of a talent, I guess, and I'm sure Eddie Jones has been on the phone to him and discussed this all with him. Shall we go through the uncapped? So we have Josh Fluke from Queensland Reds, the outside centre. Carter Gordon, we've obviously touched base on, the first 5 from Melbourne Rebels, or fly half, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
Max Jorgensen, your boy.
Maxie J.
Yeah, I'll let you come back to him. Waratahs winger fullback. Ryan Lonergan, talked about him. Brumbies uncapped. And the last 2 very interesting ones. Blake Shoop, Brumbies uncapped prop, and Brad Wilkin, Melbourne Rebels outside open side flanker uncapped. Blake Shoop, I can tell is already going to annoy me, not because he's not a good footballer, but you can see he just loves scrummaging and just the game of footy. Like, the amount of games I've watched the Brumbies, well, every game I've watched the Brumbies this year where he's playing and he wins a scrum penalty and he's just screaming in the face of his opponents. He absolutely loves it. And I think a deserved call-up for that Brumbies side. It was either going to be him or Reece Van Nieck. I had Reece Van Nieck in our form team last 3 weeks ago when we did it, so there'll be another one coming out this week. But yeah, I think a well-deserved opportunity, and from the Southern District's Shoot Shield squad from last year. So talent across the board there. And then Brad Wilkin, thoroughly deserved, another number 7 to push. You might say, look, took over that Charlie Gamble, I guess, spot. But I think just the way he's playing for the Rebels at the moment deserves it.
Gamble's injured at the moment as well, I believe.
So it wouldn't surprise me with the Waratahs injury list at the moment.
Yeah, and same with Bell as well. We see, Angus Bell on this list. Look, I like that he's looking at some of this new talent, some uncapped talent, not afraid to put it in there. And you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So basically a fifth, 20% of this squad is uncapped, right? I think the Jorgensen inclusion is a great one. You can't deny the talent, but it's also just what you said about Wilkin. Does the same for Geordie Pataia, I think. Makes him look over his shoulder a little bit for that fullback spot because, that's Pataia and Tom Wright, really. Because you look at, although Tom Wright's played a lot of wing for the Wallabies, but Pataia's been playing a fair bit of fullback for the Reds this year, I believe, and he's trying to make that full-time conversion to fullback. And that's one of the things we identified early this year is the biggest question mark for the Wallabies is who's going to play fullback, right? And, Patai could have been forgiven for thinking, well, I'll sort of stroll into that fullback jersey, right, with with his form. But now with Jorgensen, I guess sort of, putting his nose in there as the young gun, the big name on everyone's lips that's not Joseph Suaalii. I think it's another one of those ones where he's putting pressure on these guys to perform. And I feel like it's a very competitive atmosphere of everyone showing why they should keep their spot. And I think it's really lighting a fire under the players. The fact that there is so many of these young guys in the squad, and shows that nobody's safe.
Yeah, interesting enough, Jock Campbell I see didn't make it, which is, I don't think, unfair, but he played fullback on the weekend against Crusaders. Patai went back to the wing. Yeah, I mean, again, obviously, would be interesting. This is just a training camp one, so we're never going to see a team list come out of this. But it would be interesting to see who would line up where and what Eddie's already thinking. I think a relatively young squad as well, which I know Eddie's spoken about focusing on the here and now, but I wonder if this is an eve to the, hey, look, get these guys in now, even a Maxi J, and we'll keep them interested for the next 4 years at least. So, yeah, I mean, we'll definitely release our two versions of what we think a squad would make on our socials. So make sure you're following there.
And it's going to be, just to be clear, it'll be just based on this 33 plus the 7 overseas players that have been on the Zoom call. So it's not going to include injured players like Angus Bell, who, when healthy, would almost certainly be included.
Correct. So it'll be interesting, I guess, what you guys make of our teams. Obviously, myself, a Kiwi, coming at it from that point of view, and Hughesy, a Wallabies fan. Final thoughts on the squad. I'll let you have a minute to kind of say your final, I guess, thoughts and beliefs in Eddie and his first squad.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pretty. I don't really look at any of the picks here and think, why are you in the squad kind of thing. Like, you can see the reasoning behind everyone in this squad here. And I look and I see a lot of talent, and obviously the big hole, the two holes mainly, as they've always been, fly half and lock for the Wallabies. I think around the rest of the park, they've got some really good and exciting talent. But it's those two positions that will determine the success of the Wallabies for the Rugby Championship and the World Cup. So I think that's really going to be Eddie Jones's focus.
I was thinking, and this is going a bit off tangent now, but pitching this question to you: when do you think who was the last world class lock you had, not playing overseas? Like, I think Will Skelton is, but I don't like. It's just so hard with the good old law at the moment. Let's cancel that out. So, like, the world class lock.
I couldn't even tell you. I feel like, man, it's hard to think,
I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, I know. I really can't even think.
I've got one, and again, like, I'm trying to see, when did he last play?
I mean, it's hard to, I hesitate to say him, but it's only because he was captain, and that's James Horwell.
That's who I had.
Yeah.
I honestly, I actually think it is he was the last world-class lock you had, which is crazy because I think he peaked at like 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
Like when the Reds won it. The Reds won it in 2011.
Let's have a look.
Rugby.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's when he peaked, and it was like, he was quite clearly the best. So that's 10 years, 12 years going on without a, world-class locker. We might be missing someone in there. But that's, when it came to my head, he was the first I thought of. I was like, James fucking Horwell. Like, you had that headgear on, he'd get to work.
Yeah.
I think he's one of those few players that could have, like, when you're comparing world class, you put him in like an All Blacks team or something like that, and he'd fit him fine, and I think he would have.
But do you know that D Mum captained the Wallabies for one game?
That's a disgrace.
Yeah,
That is a disgrace.
Yeah, I can't believe that. Yeah, that's the only one I can think of really. Is in the last like really good one, and I hesitate to say him because he's a Queenslander.
I was like, why are you hesitating to say him? But that makes sense.
He's Queensland.
That was just interesting.
This might upset some people, but I know he's only young. But Nick Frost looked really good in his games for the Wallabies last year. He looked really good for the Wallabies.
He has,
and he's looked good for the Brumbies this year. And I know there's some fans of the show who aren't necessarily big fans of Nick Frost, and the way he plays the game. But I think he's got the ability to do it.
Yeah, he's definitely got the potential there. The way he's been playing again this year, he's had another fantastic year. Super Rugby, my friend. A big round, and I've highlighted 3 topic points to discuss. Now, the first is the Drua, because obviously biggest bandwagon supporter, Luke Rocafoko Bowden, he's back. You can't beat them at home. Like,
no.
When it was 33-7 at a half, I sat
Tuva.
there and I said, fuck, this is trouble because I've harped on about how good the Rebels are and they're about to get pumped by 60, which I just don't think is good for anyone's season. So they came back and obviously made the scoreline a bit closer. But, yeah, I wouldn't... If the Drua can ever get themselves into the top 4... and God forbid give themselves a number 1 spot down the line, you can't beat them there. Like, I don't see how you'll ever be able to beat the Drua at home. If I'm the Fijian Drua, I am right now trying to make sure that every single one of my home games next year are in Fiji.
Yeah, 100%. It's great to see that already in just the second year of them being in the competition. They're in the top 8 at this point in the season. 3-3, respectable record, very respectable record at this part of the season, and 2 of those wins against quality opponents. So
Definitely,
good on them.
Yeah. The next kind of point I've got is the Chiefs versus the Brumbies. Chiefs versus the Blues and the Brumbies versus the Waratahs games. Got lucky enough to watch both of those games. The Chiefs versus the Blues game, wow, like just a different level of skill. And then to follow it up with the Brumbies versus the Waratahs, it was 2 games where test match level intensity, and you go, man, you could that's what Super Rugby's about. That's what Super Rugby's about. And I'd love
It's unfortunate to be on the losing end of the Brumbies Waratahs one because it was such a good game.
Yeah, it was again a fantastic. It's hard when you lose ones like that because the Waratahs played their best game of the season by far and away.
3 yellow cards in that game as well. At one point we had 2 yellow cards and we still scored a try. 13 on 15. I think it's pretty incredible. And just look, it just shows the quality of those 2 teams and why I don't think the Waratah season is over by any stretch.
Definitely not.
It's just a freakish night when James Slipper scores 2 tries. That doesn't happen. It just shows the rugby gods were on the Brumbies side in that one. And yeah, it's a classic between these 2. I think it's getting up there with the. I think the Waratahs are really focusing on the Brumbies as their new biggest rival, even ahead of Queensland.
Definitely. I mean, and talking about Queensland, they are in some real, I think, strife. I honestly do. Now they 25-12 loss to the Crusaders doesn't look bad, but I was looking back at the stats and they played a hell of a game. They had players stand out, like Pattaya stood out, McDermott stood out, Harry Wilson had another fantastic game. 2 of those players didn't now get selected in the Wallabies, which you have to ask, and like you said, it's about beating the New Zealand teams. The Reds haven't beaten the Crusaders in 12 attempts now. I'm assuming that's about 12 years, give or take, maybe even 13 with COVID. So I sit there and I go, at what point, Brad Thorn, I'm not trying to say he's a bad coach because I think he's a good coach. I think he's got a time limit with every team just because of the way he coaches is probably with an iron fist, and that's not to say he takes no shit, but I just think he pushes everyone hard. A very Maguire from the Tigers / South Sydney, and it can only last for so long. I think it's hit its limit, and now that players aren't making Wallaby squads, you've got to ask, is he making those players any better? And I know there's already talk about him moving on next season, but I think there's going to be a mutual split soon if the Reds don't get a turnaround quickly. If they lose 2-3 in a row from here on out and sit 2-5, 2-6, and are outside that top 8, I really see them going, you know what, let's part. We had a good few years. We won Super Rugby AU. These players need something else, because I can imagine Tate McDermott, Harry Wilson especially, his numbers have been ridiculous to start off this year, and to see him not in the Wallabies and to go, he'll be asking the question, what's next for him?
It's sort of, this is a Reds team that's full of Wallabies talent, right? People that have played for the Wallabies, and you're not really seeing it translate. Whereas you look at the Waratahs, and you kind of say, okay, well, there's a lot of new pieces on the board here as well, but we're seeing them develop. We're seeing them really be in these games. And maybe I'm a little bit biased as a Waratahs fan, but I don't know. I would feel like Queensland would think that they're closer to a title than the Waratahs are, and yet they seem to be on pace with the Waratahs, if not maybe slightly behind the Waratahs.
If you put those two teams up against each other and said who's more likely to win a title, I'm picking the Waratahs based purely, and again, what Eddie Jones says, it comes down to beating New Zealand teams. I've seen them beat the Crusaders. I've seen them push the Hurricanes all the way. I just don't see that from the Reds, and I haven't seen it for too long, and I just think it's time for form to move on.
Yeah, and once again, when you're a foreign coach, the pressure.
You don't think he gets away with
increased.
it with the Aussie rugby league side and playing for Queensland and State of O? You don't think that gives him a...
Nah.
Not when you put on that All Black jersey.
I think, exactly. I think he may have given him some now, but that's probably run out by now. I think it's run out.
Yep.
For the fact where we're, 2 years ago in the depths of COVID, right? It was, or was it 3 years ago now? God, I can't even remember. But the Super Rugby AU game was between the Reds and the Brumbies, and that was a thriller, like down to the wire game. And now the Reds are just sort of a bit of a non-entity again. And it's like...
What's happened? Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Moving on from the Reds woes, I just want to touch on two more things. The Champions Cup came back on in the round of 16, and I just sat there, I watched some highlights. I just can't believe we don't have something like this over here. It guts me. Now they're into quarterfinals. There's 2 South African teams, 1 Irish team, 3 English teams, and 2 French teams left. And I just go, man, it's just so exciting to be able to see teams from, those 2 South Africans and 1 Irish are in the URC, but teams from different competitions, teams from different countries who have a base of different players who play the game slightly differently. Obviously, football has their Champions League. We have the Champions Cup. Just in Asia, there's nothing quite like it. And I just go, man, and you can sit there and say Asian Football Championship. I think they've got a version. But for rugby, I would love to see, the top of New Zealand face the top of Japan and stuff like that, and top of Aussie and go to a conference.
Shoot shield clubs versus New Zealand equivalent clubs and things like that.
Stuff like that, just something, because this Champions Cup, I just get so fascinated when it rolls around.
That's such a great way to revive grassroots rugby as well, because shoot shield is relatively grassroots level here in Australia, right? So, that would be such a great way to get more people wanting to play subbies rugby for a chance to show off, and then move up to shoot shield level rugby to play some of these international teams. So imagine if, playing as a shoot shield team, you had the chance to go to New Zealand and play a New Zealand team, or play a South African team, or play a Japanese team, or something like that. Like that would be so great. Like, I think, there's a chance that I can do this,
Totally.
So the teams in the quarterfinal here, Leinster from Ireland versus Leicester from England. That's going to be a fun one for the commentators to do. Leinster and Leicester.
Yep.
Toulouse and the Sharks, so French and South African there. Exeter versus the Stormers, English and South African. And La Rochelle versus the Saracens, so French and English there.
So some really good games on that. So, yeah, I'm excited when it gets to the semi-finals, and I'll probably eventually stay up for the final just purely because I'm getting that hooked onto it. I really don't care who wins it, but I just love the different styles of footy coming together. You know, very, you got to think like, imagine playing Super Rugby one week and you've played the Super Rugby game this week, and then next week you've got to go and play, you know, a Japanese top League One team, and it's just such a different game, and it's just keeping me very interested on my notes. The new rugby game. There is a Rugby 24 that's been announced by Big Ant Studios, I believe it is, who actually does all the rugby league games. So it's not a Rugby Challenge or an EA Sports. It's a Australian-based game developer. So I am excited because what they actually do really well is customizable. So you can make a lot of things. So even if they don't have licenses, but hopefully they do, you'll
with the
be able
game
to
now
custom.
licensed to use World Cup 2023 sides. There you go.
So yeah,
as well as the international game, there will also be clubs from the URC, Top 14, and Pro D2 to choose from. So no Asia Pacific, so no Super Rugby tournament. Super Rugby license but you would expect if they're licensing the World Cup teams, they'd get that done sooner rather than later.
I can't imagine Super Rugby not wanting to be in that game unless Super Rugby is with like Rugby Challenge, and then I don't know. Again, I just saw it coming out, and I was like, awesome! Like I love more rugby games on the market. Ideally, is it going to push up again the heightening of the game, and hopefully get us a decent one sooner or later. We will be getting Rugby 08 in the studio sooner rather than later, and then I will be putting 100 points on Hughesy's Wallabies. To finish today, we've done our 10 best rugby players ever. I've gone with my version of the 5 best cross-code athletes. Now, I've gone just down under. I haven't taken into account a Bo Jackson or a Deion Sanders or any of that who have played, you know, baseball and football, or basketball and baseball when you come to like Michael Jordan. So I've gone down under. Number 1 is a man we've actually mentioned quite heavily on this podcast, Brad Fawn. I think cross-code, to play at the level he played, is to play at the Kangaroos and the All Blacks, the 2 best teams in this area for both sports, and have the career he did. I couldn't go past Brad Fawn as my number 1.
Yep.
Number 2, I had Sonny Bill Williams. Now, trio of codes, when you look at his boxing record, again, not that impressive, and I was never that impressed by his boxing. But rugby and rugby league was where it is at. And to make that transition to rugby and be an All Black and be able to play in All Blacks World Cup games, it's never easy, as we've seen from Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. So I've always been impressed by Sonny Bill Williams in my number 2 position.
Yep.
Number 3, Israel Folau. Now, that was an easy one for me, and I was actually toying between 3 and 2. The fact that he also played AFL and played it at a high level, the guy was a freak. Take all his off the field stuff as a difference. He was a freak on the field, and I think if he had chosen one sport and stayed at it and didn't have the off-the-field incidents, could have been the best ever for that team. So for the Wallabies, for the Queensland Maroons, for the, I think it was Gold Coast Suns that he played for.
I think it was
Greater Western Sydney,
wasn't it?
Was it? Yeah. It's one of those two. It was over something orange, that I remember.
Pretty sure it was Greater Western Sydney. I'll fact check you now.
Hit me with a fact check. But yeah, I just think Izzy Folau and 3 can't be not on this list.
GWS it was.
GWS, nice. In number 4, I've got Big Dal, Wendell Sailor.
Yeah.
I couldn't go past him. And I've actually gone his winger teammate, Lottie Takiri, in 5.
I was going to say, you better have Lottie in there.
It was 4 and 5 where I went back and I just looked at everything and I was like, I just think Dal was Dal. Now, I know, obviously, there was steroids was chucked in there and everything and stuff like that. But Dal was Dal. Like, he was something generational, and Lottie was very close. Like, when Lottie was on the wing for the Tigers in those early days, you'd watch him and be like, holy shit, and then when he came across, you were like, just as much like, holy shit. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that the top first 1 and 2 are, were All Blacks. And I feel like that does hold something to it. Like Roger was to go to a World Cup, I still don't, and win a World Cup, he'd have to be centre stage to make this list, I think, because at the moment, and maybe it's because it was so later in his career, like he's already, had hit 30s and stuff, he just hasn't had the same impact that these players have. And Mariki Korobeti was close as well, I must say that, because he became he is one of the world's best. I just couldn't put him ahead of Lotte or Wendell yet.
Especially, I was going to say that because they finished their careers, I think they get it slightly above him because Korobeti can achieve more. I think by the time he's done, he will be on this list.
I tend to agree as well.
I don't really have much to say about that list. I think it's a pretty good list.
Excellent. Look at me go. Keeping you pleased, mate.
Yeah.
Well, that does us here today. Obviously, stay tuned on our socials at the Sports Booth for our teams to come out for the Aussie squad that's just been named. But for now, thank you for joining us. A smaller week next week, only 4 Super Rugby games.
Yeah.
But we'll sort out a live stream soon on one of the games. I will hit Husey up after this to sort out a date, and we'll go from there. But for now, thank you for joining us on That Rugby Podcast. We will see you later.
Peace.